What's up, guys? We're back with another 10-Minute Tuesday, and this week we want to talk about something that is obviously vitally important to being a successful waterfowl. What's that?
You can look at them.
Look at what?
Them.
Hi.
Because this is on our YouTube channel.
My face is just white. You see my face,
Look
dude?
at this one.
It's just white.
I'm a ghost.
Anyway, dude. We want to talk about scouting, and then from scouting, what your decoy spread looks like. So,
honestly,
Joey,
the amount of questions that we get on scouting, man, is honestly overwhelming.
Yeah, it's
crazy. And it
crazy.
feels really common to me, just like how to scout for birds. It feels really easy to me just because I've been doing it for so long. But we've been getting so many questions on it that we felt like we should dedicate this 10-Minute Tuesday to scouting.
I think it will be helpful for some people, for sure. Mm-hmm. If you know how to scout and you're successful scouting, and then this might not be for you.
Yeah.
But
if you're really good, then peace out.
Bye. All right. So, Joey, there's three things for the most part that birds are doing. Can you go through those?
At night, they're sitting on a roost. That's their safe place. That's where they know they're not going to die, whatever. That's where a large congregation of birds are hanging out. Then you have a loaf. That's where they hang out in between feeding, right? They're just hanging out. They're being social. They're drinking water a lot of times. They're just hanging out.
Which is a good telltale sign, not to cut you off, but a lot of times a loaf is water. Mm-hmm. Almost all the time.
Why don't they go to the same spots?
What do you mean?
Like, why don't they just go back to the roost?
Sometimes they do. So that's the difference. So a lot of times, especially later in the season, there is no loaf because there's no open water. So they go back to the roost in order to drink, be social, be safe, blah, blah.
So it's like coming from a pond to a grass field.
I don't like this voice.
Yeah, what is this?
So it's like coming from a pond to a grass field, and then they'll go to some other water, and then back to the grass field, and then back to the roost.
Yeah,
yep. And sometimes, so it's a lot more difficult, I'd say, to scout birds earlier in the year because there's so much open water and there's so many places for them to eat. Mm-hmm. And it totally depends on your area, but let me just take this area in specific. If they roost on the river and then they go out to feed in the morning and then they go out to some sheet water area where they can eat, or a pond, or something where they can eat invertebrates, drink water, and be social, be safe, essentially. And then they go back out to feed, and then they go back out to the roost. So the tough part about early season is that there's so much open water to where they can just, sometimes they will move their loaf. And I've been burned on this many times in this area. There's so much water in Minnesota. We are the land of 10,000 lakes, and in reality, it's more like 15,000. Mm-hmm. It just depends on what people call.
Yeah, and if you count what a Wisconsin counts as a lake, then we're like 30,000.
Yeah,
exactly.
We got a lot of long lakes in Minnesota.
We do.
But anyway, the really important thing, it depends on what time you're scouting at. So say you're the normal 9 to 5 guy, you are not able to scout before work.
Yeah,
you are going to be able to scout in the afternoon when they're feeding at night and then going back to the roost. So in that situation, you are able to see what they're eating and then where they're staying at night. Cool.
Right.
Sounds
so,
great.
And let me just point this out too. So what Joey's saying is you want to go to where they're feeding, right? And when a lot of people would stop there, okay? But I would highly encourage people, if you find them where they're feeding and you have the time, follow them from their feed back to the roost, because there's a multitude of reasons. But number one, if you follow them, then if you don't have that feed field locked down, now you know what a good traffic line is, right? So if you're going to traffic hunt birds and you know where they're roosting and where they're feeding, now you have the opportunity to find a field in between that and pick a good traffic field. B, now you know how many birds are actually using that roost, because a lot of times multiple groups of birds will feed different fields but use the same roost at night. So it can give you a good representation of how many birds are actually in your area, because you might go and scout 100 birds feeding in a field, but then you follow them back to the roost and there's 500 birds on the roost, right? So now you know, oh, well, there's only 100 birds in that field, but there's 500 birds on this specific roost. So now if there's, tomorrow, you know where to start scouting them. Let's say you scout them on a Friday afternoon and you're not going to hunt a Saturday. You can scout them that morning, Saturday morning, and start at the roost and follow them to a feed, or follow a different group to a different feed.
Essentially, the more information that you have, the better.
Yeah, 100%. Go ahead, Connor.
So for going back to the 9 to 5er, what's a good way to do some scouting online?
There's a great app that I don't know if it's real or not because I've been burned on it twice. It's the Ducks Unlimited app.
Okay.
And people go on there and they say a lot of birds in this area, a lot of birds in that area, and then I've gotten there late every single time. So I don't know. I mean, internet scouting is you patrolling Facebook and seeing how well people are doing in an area. And then you look at their profile and you see where they're at because most people aren't really going too far from home.
Internet scouting is a lot more helpful for duck hunting. And it's not so much that you're scouting birds. It's more that you're finding locations where you can hunt birds, right? So like the DNR maps are a super helpful thing, at least in Minnesota. I'm not sure what other states look like, but the DNR maps in Minnesota can tell you what's public and what's not. So that at least you know, hey, here's a public lake. It's close to a WMA or a WPA, and there's a good opportunity that I could shoot birds there, right? So that's pretty helpful when you're hunting ducks on public land.
Yeah.
But in terms of scouting geese or even ducks in fields, there's really not a super successful way to internet scout.
Well, and that's pretty Minnesota specific because
Yes,
places like North Dakota have a lot of public fields that they can hunt as long as it's not posted.
Right.
And whatever.
Private fields, but not posted.
It's pretty area specific.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But the way that we hunt, if you're going to be hunting public, you're more than likely hunting ducks.
Yep.
But 99% of the time. So, but in places like North Dakota or Kansas, whatever.
It's still private. It's just not posted.
Well, or you can get permission on it pretty easily.
Right.
Another question.
Yeah, and here's the thing though too is and I know it sounds basic and we kind of talked about it, but like Joey mentioned in the very beginning, the biggest thing you can know is birds are doing one of three things. They're either roosting, they're feeding, or they're loafing. Right? So they get up off the roost, they go to a feed, they go to a loaf, they go to a feed, they go to the roost.
Yep.
That is the biggest thing you can possibly know. There's no amount of information that won't be helpful.
Does that vary between geese, lessers, ducks?
Yes.
How?
So we're mostly talking about Canada's, if anything, and then also ducks. But we don't get lessers in Minnesota, so I don't even put any energy toward them. As far as I know, for lessers, they're hitting roost, feed. And when they are feeding, they're feeding all day. Whereas, and that's off of my personal experience hunting in Kansas and hunting in Oklahoma. They are feeding as much as they can till they can't. So we're mostly talking about larger Canada geese from 7 pounds to 20 pounds. That's what we're talking about.
20 pounds.
So what about for ducks and scouting ducks? What's the strategy there?
Be there first thing in the morning.
Yeah.
If you think ducks are going to hit an area, be there first thing in the morning because that's when they're most active. And then ducks late season, and again, totally depends on the area, but in our area, they're hunting corn. We are hunting them in cornfields and bean fields.
So
it's later in the season. It's later October, early November till the end of season, which is the end of November, and it's a little bit colder. There are no loafs open.
Do they go from big water to small to big?
So that was one thing I was going to bring up. One of the things, at least that I've noticed a lot of times, is a loaf is typically not like a big lake.
No.
It's like a pond.
Yep.
Do you know why that is?
I just think it's more social.
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't have an educated
It's always
answer
been
for that.
interesting for me, right? Because I'm like, as I'm scouting these birds, following them to a loaf, it's like they're roosting on a lake.
It's less windy. It's less,
They're roosting on a lake, feeding in a field, and then loafing on a tiny pond.
Usually shallower, so they can probably access more,
It's just more chill.
They can eat
Less work.
invertebrates.
Yeah.
More food.
Yeah. No, I think those are the biggest three things to know. Birds are doing one of three things. They're loafing, they're feeding, they're roosting.
Mainly talking about
figuring
geese.
it out.
Yeah.
And before we have 30 seconds left, but early season Canada geese, it's really tough because in the morning they'll be eating grass and in the afternoon they'll be eating wheat. So if you're only able to scout them in the afternoon and you see them eating wheat, you're going to go, okay, let's go hunt them in the wheat. And then you show up next morning, they're not there. And that's because you don't know enough information. So my best advice is hunt with a party to where people have different work schedules to where you can go and find those birds all throughout the day. The more information, the better.
And coordinate your schedules with each other.
Yeah.
Right? Like talk as a group, work as a team. Joey, you're scouting him in the morning. I'll scout him in the afternoon, whatever.
Yeah. Hopefully it helped. Let us know in the comments below if this is, if there's something else or something we missed, any other strategies for your area, scouting with boats, whatever. And we will see you guys soon.